Fantastic. So, hello everyone who, if you're probably watching this as a recorded video, we're presenting this for the Guild's Wellbeing Week, and we're going to talk a bit about harm reduction and drug safety and how to stay safe when you're doing drugs, because we know that drugs are very prevalent at the university. And although the best way to stay safe is to not do them, we know that some people will do them regardless. So I'm speaking as president of the Psychedelic Society at Exeter. We largely focus on psychedelics, not all drugs. So specifically sort of like philosophy, spirituality, and neuroscience, sort of asking the big questions: what consciousness is, what psychedelics tell us about consciousness, and sort of like more broad metaphysical questions that are raised by the psychedelic experience. But of course, we're also going to be focused a bit on drug safety, and psychedelics are illegal, as are lots of other drugs. So there's not a huge amount of information out there on what people can do to make sure that they stay safe. So we're going to split this presentation into two. We're going to talk about the drugs themselves, and then we're going to talk about set and setting, both of which are really important. Now, the best way to stay safe is to not take drugs at all. But as I said, we're here to give you some tips for those that still do. So this presentation, which is available to everyone, has at the start this chart. And this chart is going to be referred back to for the different tests that you can do on different drugs. So at the top are the different reagent tests, all of which are available to buy from Reagent Tests UK. This is not a paid advertisement for them, but they do provide really good reagent tests and this chart to make sure that you know what you're taking. Because often if you're buying things illegally, which they will be illegal in this country, you can't be certain of what you're taking. That's really dangerous. A lot of the dangers of drug taking comes from that. So this is an important chart for people to be aware of, and the different reagents at the top here. And here are some useful links. Oxford's Students' Union has a link there, and they've got lots and lots of different drugs, how to stay safe, what the drugs do to you, and so on. Psychonaut Wiki is really good. Lots of really in-depth drug information on specific drugs as well. And then that's the Loop, and the Loop do drug testing at festivals and at events around the UK. And they've got lots of useful infographics on how to stay safe, and also warnings of specific pills and so on that could be in circulation and could be dangerous. So I definitely recommend checking those out. So we'll get started on the drugs themselves. So this is cannabis. Cannabis is probably the most common drug in the UK, a legal drug that's used. And what does it do? So cannabis gets you high. And if you haven't done it, it's a very difficult thing to explain, but it is used in lots of different sort of recreational settings. A lot of people, have a good time on it. You can smoke it and you can eat it as an edible, but it can also cause a lot of problems such as anxiety, paranoia, and overthinking, especially in combination with other drugs, or if sort of overdone. And of course, smoking causes lung damage. How can you test it? You can't test cannabis. It comes as sort of the dried plant itself, usually. So the best way of knowing what you're smoking is through sight and smell. But sorry, I haven't finished that. But this is inaccurate, and there are sort of no ways of knowing fully what you're smoking. And I'll just add that cannabis has two components to it: CBD and THC. And THC is what gets you high. Now, when you buy illegal cannabis, the THC content is often much higher as a ratio than the CBD, as opposed to sort of cannabis that's grown sort of for medicinal purposes. Now, THC is known to cause things like psychosis and other neurological disorders, and which are of course very dangerous, and you don't want to sort of fall into those. So, and those come from excessive cannabis smoking, and also smoking bad bad cannabis. So those are things to watch out for and just be aware of before you decide to perhaps do them. And there's a link to the Oxford Students' Union on how to practice harm reduction with cannabis. And one thing I'd also just quickly add, a lot of people are into eating edibles, so they'll get brownies or chocolate that's got cannabis, and people will eat them, and they will think, oh, no effect's happening, and they'll wait a bit, and then they'll eat some more, and then it will all come on at once, and people have quite an intense experience. So what I'd say is, if you're going to do edibles, don't eat loads, be mindful of your dose, and don't necessarily top up. Edibles also last a long time, which is something to be aware of as well. So I think a lot of the bad experiences that people have with cannabis come from those sorts of situations where people are overdoing it because they're not noticing the effects straight away. So that's something really to be mindful of. And I think a lot of cannabis users would say that as well. And of course, the drug is illegal. So there are all sorts of other associated dangers that come from the criminality of it. Cocaine. So cocaine is another relatively popular drug in the UK. It gives people feelings of self-confidence, reduced inhibition, and impulsive behavior. And there's also potential for overheating and cardiovascular problems. Long-term, cocaine is very famous for being very addictive. It's something that can cause lots of like long-term issues for people, such as depression and anxiety, all associated with long-term misuse. Cocaine, as mentioned, reduces inhibition, which is really dangerous because that causes sort of like the more harmful behaviors. So, for example, a lot of the dangerous behaviors that people sort of display on alcohol through reduced inhibition are also sort of perhaps even exaggerated if people do cocaine. And also cocaine is often done in combination with lots of other drugs. And of course, lots of certain mixing of drugs is very dangerous for people. So I would personally really advise against all use of cocaine. But if you do still decide to use it, what you should definitely do is test it. So there are 3 tests that you can use for this. The Marcus reagent, Mandolin, and Lieberman. I think I'm saying that right. And if you go back to the chart that's earlier on in the presentation, you can see what colors it should go to ensure that it's, you know what you're doing and you know that it's safe. And again, there's a link on this page to tell you a bit more about what you can do to stay safe if you're doing cocaine. And this is from the loop. This is basically telling you a little bit about dosage. So to make sure that you're not doing loads. So yeah, go slow and stay low, especially if it's your first time doing it. And combining with alcohol is very dangerous. As I said, cocaine reduces inhibitions, as does alcohol. So there are all sorts of behaviors that would be very dangerous to yourself and to others with such combinations. And of course, using dirty straws. So a lot of people snort cocaine. That's how diseases are spread, and there are also all sorts of issues with cocaine that are very dangerous. So it's worth just being aware of that, being mindful of it, and if you do decide to do cocaine, definitely test your drugs, so you know what you're doing. Ketamine. So ketamine is also incredibly popular, and it's a dissociative, and it can cause confusion, but also euphoria, and people party on it. It is, I believe, a sedative, or at least an anesthetic of some sort. I think it's used in vets use it to tranquilize animals, large animals. So there are all sorts of dangers with this then, of course, vomiting, and it's dangerous in combination with alcohol, as I think a lot of drugs are. And long-term use can cause kidney and bladder damage. A lot of people, ketamine users, describe this. So there's a lot of anecdotal evidence on this. And you can also become addicted to ketamine. but a lot of people, it's very popular. People do it in clubs. So if you are going to use it, definitely test it with the MEC reagent, Lieberman, Mandelin, and I was going to say Freud, but I don't quite know how to say that word. So make sure you use all those reagents and test them against that chart so that they turn the right color and you know that what you're taking is safe. And so yeah, same again, go slow and stay low. So don't do loads at once. The effects take, you know, a little bit of time to kick in. Go slow and make sure it's safe, and definitely avoid mixing ketamine with other drugs. It can be very dangerous, and definitely go back and, you know, have a read of this to make sure that it's, you know, you'll take all the appropriate precautions. MDMA. So MDMA, again, very popular in party settings. What does it do? Well, it can give people a sense of bliss, euphoria, feelings of intense love, and also some perceptual changes, especially in combination with other drugs. But it can also increase your heart rate, and there's a potential for overheating. Quite famously with ecstasy, there's a potential for overheating and dehydration. So it's really important that you stay hydrated on MDMA. We'll talk about this a little bit later on when we talk about set and setting. And it can also damage your brain. So what MDMA does is it plays on your serotonin receptors and creates feelings of pure happiness that are incredible in the moment, but of course you've got to come down. When you're using that sort of serotonin, you're basically borrowing happiness from the now, from the future for the now. So your brain will have to replete its serotonin system. So it's definitely important not to do MDMA often, but also even if you do it just for one night, to not do too much, because it can cause lots of problems, such as serotonin syndrome. And of course, long-term use can cause addiction and depression as well, with those come downs. So MDMA is a dangerous one, but again, it's one that you can mitigate a lot of the risks just simply by being very safe with it and sort of understanding how it works. And again, definitely test it. What you need to test it's there. Get a hold of those reagents and make sure that you know what you're taking. It can come as a pill, and it can come as powder. In the pills, often it's mixed with other things. So pills can often be quite dangerous because there are all sorts of other things packed into them. But MDMA also comes as just a powder. Yeah, and yeah, there's the Loop's harm reduction on that. So definitely sip water regularly, but not too much, and take frequent breaks. So if you're in a club, make sure you're taking a breather, and let people know as well that you're taking MDMA. Okay, 2CB. So 2CB is a psychedelic. It's people liken it to MDMA, but it's not quite MDMA. It's not MDMA at all. Actually, it's very much a psychedelic, and it is possible to have a bad trip on 2CB. So that's one thing that people need to be aware of. It's not just a party drug. You know, it can be quite intense. So you have psychedelic perceptual changes, euphoria, bliss, but as I mentioned, you know, potential for bad trips. It also increases your heart rate, and of course there's a potential for overheating. So it's definitely worth being mindful of that. And of course, definitely test 2CB as well, and let people know that you're on it. Testing 2CB is really important because there are lots of other dangerous drugs that come as pills. With 2CB as well, there are lots of different 2C drugs. So I think there's 2CP, which is particularly dangerous. And that causes all sorts of problems with people's hearts, especially in combination with other drugs. So as I'd say with lots of these drugs, don't mix them. And if you are going to do them, definitely test them. So those are the 3 tests you can get for 2CB, just to make sure that there aren't dangerous chemicals in it. But again, these tests don't tell you that the drug is completely safe. These tests are only really a guide. They're just really a first step to make sure that you know what you're doing. And now to LSD. Now, LSD is a different sort of kettle of fish to the other drugs. LSD is what you call a classical psychedelic. It's can cause very intense psychedelic experiences. It also lasts 12 hours, which I'd say is where arguably one of the biggest risks come from, people sort of getting confused or stressed out. And sort of bad trips, I'd say, is one of the largest dangers with LSD. So it's a powerful and intense experience. The substance itself doesn't cause any physiological damage to you. That's been proven. However, the bad trips and the behavior that you can get, that you can display whilst on LSDs can be dangerous. So that's really worth bearing in mind. What I would say is always have a trip sitter, perhaps. We'll talk about this a bit later on. If you are going to do it, of course, it is an illegal drug. And if you can test this, if you're going to do this, definitely test it, and test it with an ELRIC reagent test. And it should go purple. And the Oxford Students' Union has a whole guide on LSD. Also, I'd plan your LSD usage. So I'd say this for all drugs as well. If you're going to try them, especially something for the first time, or if you're thinking of doing them, spontaneity in drug use is often a recipe for disaster, because spontaneity often involves alcohol and mixing of drugs. For a substance like LSD, that's really not a good idea. These are really, they cause quite powerful experiences for people that often people are not expecting, not ready for. And as I said, it lasts 12 hours. So it's really something that's worth, considering carefully. So I haven't talked about things like magic mushrooms and psilocybin and other psychedelics, because you're not often able to test them. You can't really test magic mushrooms, but all the sort of like guides for set and setting will apply to that. So Richard, I think, is going to speak a little bit about set and setting now. Is that right?
Yep. So I think we've got two slides, one on set and setting and one on sort of clubbing, which is different context, different drugs. So set and setting really applies to psychedelics. So when preparing for a psychedelic trip, which can be very sort of heavy, very time intensive, very powerful experiences, it's really important to prepare and to consider a few things before you go. So as Angus said, spontaneity is, especially with psychedelics, a risky strategy. So the two rules of preparing for a trip is set and setting. Now, set is to do with mindset. So it's basically with what purpose and intention you're going into the trip. So you need to think about your actual headspace as you're about to take whatever psychedelic it is. So be honest about how you're feeling about it. If you're feeling worried or anxious about it, be clear about that with yourself and with your trip sitter if you have one. If you're feeling excited, exactly, great. If you're feeling apprehensive about anything, or annoyed or bothered, just be clear about exactly how you're feeling as you're going into it, because those things will tend to be magnified and brought out by the trip. So very important to prepare for those so that you're ready if it comes along. If you're starting a trip feeling a bit nervous, it's understandable that as you come up and start tripping, that anxiety might get sort of multiplied, and you have to sort of just be aware that that might happen, and that ultimately that's okay. That's perfectly normal, perfectly natural. But if you're not ready for it and you're not expecting it, that can be sometimes what throws you off and sets you down a sort of unpleasant path. So headspace and set going into it, very important. So included in set, you might want to think about why you're doing it. So are you tripping just to have fun, or have you got some sort of things you want to listen to or read about or draw, or are you doing it to explore something in your own life, to tackle maybe like an issue that you've been going over? Maybe you're struggling with a particular problem or person and you want to like delve more deeply into that during the trip. Get those things ready. So write them down, put down some thoughts you might want to consider while you're tripping. Have a kind of sense of maybe direction. It can be quite useful, quite helpful when you're actually tripping to sort of remember I suppose where it's trying to take you, and that can have sort of help to have a bit of a rudder while you're sort of sailing through it. So that's set basically. It's where you are when you're about to trip and why you're doing it. So setting is more to do with the physical settings really, and the preparations for it. So it's always best to go into it with plenty of time, a full day, an open day where no one is going to impress upon you or strain your time or suddenly call you out the blue and be like, I need you to come over here, because that will inevitably be sort of quite perturbing, might cause a lot of anxiety, especially when you're mid-trip and something comes up you weren't expecting. It can be quite stressful. So always block out some time for it, and sort of get ready, allow yourself to sort of get as calm as you can be and feel ready for it. So that might mean like listening to music or doing meditation or yoga if you have a practice like that. It can just mean talking with a friend about it and how you're feeling about it and what you want to get out of it. Having a trip sitter, if you want one, someone there to sit with you while you're tripping who's not tripping, so that if anything comes up, they can deal with it and you don't have to worry. But of course, if you think that you find it a bit off-putting having someone else there while you're doing it, you can do it by yourself, but just let someone know that you're tripping, because that way, if something does go wrong, you can have someone to contact who can come and help you out and knows what you're going through. So that's set and setting. Preparing your mindset, preparing your sort of surroundings, make sure you're somewhere comfortable that you know well. If you're in an unfamiliar place, again, that can be quite stressful. So do it either in a room you're comfortable with, or somewhere outside if you want to be outside, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's the bulk of set and setting, I think, for sort of psychedelic trips. Just be ready for whatever may come along, and prepare yourself as best you can. Okay, cool. Should we so talk a bit about clubbing and partying now? So for all sorts of other drugs outside of psychedelics like cocaine, MDMA, ketamine, etc., they're largely used in the context of clubbing and partying. Okay, obviously you can use them individually at home, but it's fairly unusual. So the set of a club and a party presents its own challenges and own things to be mitigated. So hydration is one of the really important ones, especially with a drug like MDMA or cocaine, where they really they get your heart pumping a lot. That can really sort of increase your body's heat production, and you can overheat if you're not properly hydrated, and that can cause sort of heat exhaustion or heat stroke, that kind of thing. So it's important to drink a lot of water. The standard rule of thumb is about 500. If you're on MDMA, is about 500 milliliters of water sort of per hour maximum, because when you're on these drugs, it can also be quite tempting to drink too much water, and you can overhydrate. So because it makes you so sort of like hot and warm, drinking water feels fantastic, and especially refreshing, and it can cause you to like drink too much. So it's important to make sure that your friends know what you're taking, so that in case anything happens or goes wrong, they understand fully what your sort of situation is. Take breaks, stay cool, go outside, sit outside the club for a bit just to calm down, take some air. Now, with regard to actually taking the substances, avoid high doses. And that's not just for health reasons and like just staying safe physically. It's also just because for most drugs that you take in a clubbing or partying setting, actually medium to low doses are where you would end up with what you might call like the most desirable effects. Take very, very high doses of something like MDMA and ketamine, and actually it just can become very unpleasant because you're so overstimulated or so disassociated that you actually you're not even fully aware of what's going on. So just staying to a sensible dose is not only gets the desired effects, but is also the safest way to go. So we recommend taking only the amount that you plan on taking. Don't take a couple of grams and then you might just be tempted to take even more than you plan to. Just take only what you're expecting to take, and that way you won't run the risk of overdosing.
And I'll just add in there, I wouldn't recommend taking a couple of grams of anything. Make sure you're looking at low doses. And I'll reiterate what Richard said. You don't need to take much for most of these substances to sort of feel the effect and have a good time on them. Part of the reason these things are regulated so heavily and are illegal is because they're really potent. So you really don't need much in order to have the desired effect. And if you do too much, it's not as pleasant and it's not safe.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, the final thing is don't mix substances. There is a chart online actually of the interactions between different drugs. I don't think we actually haven't put it on here, but we can post it in somewhere else. But you can find the charts online which compare what happens with the level, like sort of danger of mixing different things. Some substances work okay together, but the vast majority of them just tend to exacerbate each other, and especially the health risks, especially taking stimulants with depressants, things like benzos with uppers like speed or cocaine, that can actually sort of cause instant heart failure. So it's really, really important that you check, that you know what you're taking and which ones are dangerous together. Alcohol especially. Alcohol is a depressant, which most people forget because we drink it so often and because it's so commonplace. But it does sort of depress your nervous system, and it's sort of and affects your heart. And if you mix that with something like cocaine or MDMA, it can actually just sort of cause like sudden heart palpitations, all sorts of things. So yeah, don't mix substances, but if you absolutely are going to, then just check that the combination isn't too unsafe. Right,
Yeah,
that's it really.
That's all we've got to present. I'll just go back to, I'll stop sharing for a second just to see who's in the cool. Yeah, so if anyone has any comments or suggestions or any questions and points of discussion, fire away, and we can put your thoughts into the PowerPoint. And the PowerPoint will go up on our page afterwards, available to everyone. And within the PowerPoint, there are lots of useful links to useful places. So put any questions in the chat, or you can always message the page afterwards, and we'll try and help out. Or if anyone has any disagreements with what we've said, we've based this presentation on our own knowledge and taking it from some other resources, including the Loop and the Oxford Students' Union. Drugs are quite seriously under researched, so lots of people have different ideas of different things. So feel free to share your thoughts. Richard, do you have any extra comments? If not, I think
no, not really. I think we've covered everything. I mean, Louise, are you still there?
I am still here.
Oh, right. So I think we're sort of all done, really.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We've got Penny here and Ruby as well, and I think I think we would all say it's the way that you pitched it was really, really great. I think it's really, really informative, and useful. I think it's a pity that we didn't have more students here to see it, but we have recorded it. So I think it's we need to put that somewhere where students can come and get hold of it. I mean, me and Ruby were chatting in another chat that we have, and we were just saying how good it was, and that it was just just a shame that there weren't more people here. But as I've said, that has generally been a bit of a trend with some of the things. We tend to get better engagement when it's on Facebook, but obviously before we started, we just had to check with comms, but we will make sure that it gets put somewhere where people can see it.
Yeah, well, mainly we'll put up the PowerPoint on our own page.
Yeah.
So that, and if people have questions, they can always ask us. And we always draw attention to this at the start of our events.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously like a lot of work's gone into it. You're very knowledgeable, and it's I think people will find that really useful. Hello, Penny.
Hello. It was absolutely brilliant, and just like, I'm really sorry about the Facebook stuff, but we will get it up as soon as we can, because it was brilliant and definitely something that we need to be talking about. So thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Well, yeah, thank you very much for hosting us.
That's quite all right.
Yeah, I do have a question actually.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Do you think there is more that the Students' Guild and the university can do to support students who may want to use drugs in a supportive way?
Yeah, so definitely. I spoke to Sunday about this last term a bit. So of course we've got the drug survey out. I'm not sure what our engagement is. I need to reach out and speak to her about that. But I think drug testing provided by the university would be really, really good. So often we've had people message our page often saying that they'd like to test drugs and they're asking where they can get them. They wonder if we provide them. We don't. They'd be too expensive for our society to provide. And I think that lots of students would do them, would test their drugs if tests were available. I also think it could be worth working with clubs or like with festivals, and instead of having sort of a blanket no drugs sort of like policy, actually start to sort of like work with drug users who are going to be doing these substances anyway, and just try and educate them a bit better.
I just have. Sorry, sorry. I was just gonna say, I just like coming from someone who, I mean, I graduated in 1999. Okay, so you know, the internet was quite a new thing when I was at university, but like just to even be, you know, kind of at a student union event, university event, and be talking about drugs in this way is just so like, you know, if this had happened, you know, in 1999, you know, it's just such a huge like shift from where we were at then, but just like it's just such a, I just see it as being such a positive thing. Instead of it just being swept underneath the carpet, it's just like something like, oh no, this doesn't go on at our institution. It's just, you know, it's just so refreshing. I mean, I'm really new to this role, so you know, I haven't, if I'm being completely honest, have not, you know, until I've started doing this, have heard the term harm reduction before, and hearing you talk about it just seems like, you know, just like, why haven't people been doing this sooner? Why isn't this not something that is just done at
I think it's like the changing the way we talk about it, really, because from just blanket bad to a bit more nuance, and realizing that ultimately just if a university, government, anything can like prevent accidental deaths, then that's just like, no one would reasonably not want that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was at university, there was a case of a girl called Leah Betts, who was, I think, the first girl, she was a teenager to die from ecstasy. And it was in all the newspapers, you know, and kind of things, but it was, you know, never at any point had it been thought about like educating people about taking ecstasy. It was just like, you know, like, don't do it. But then of course, when you say that, it's just, you know, it's not going to stop it.
No.
It's I mean, just refreshing.
You know, sort of hundreds of thousands of people like take it regularly, safely, and if you just sort of told everyone how to do it, then you wouldn't have any cases of, you know, teenagers who take too much and die. But
and the testing thing as well, I mean, that is,
like even in my experience at uni, like I didn't have like a massive friend group, but like there were people that I lived with and my friend groups and stuff that would recreationally use drugs. And I know that even just for my own peace of mind, like if I knew that one of my friends had a testing kit, like it just would have made me feel so much more comfortable, like knowing that they had that. Like it just, I completely agree. And like you said, Richard, if the government and if the university can prevent accidental deaths, then like why is that being contested?
Like,
no brainer, isn't it?
So thank you so much. Like it's I'm so grateful that you guys have come in, and you're, like Louise said, you put in so much to that presentation, and it's so like well thought out, and I'm really excited to share it more so that more people can see it.
I think we feel like really passionately about making sure that it is somewhere where people can see it as well. And because I think it's one of those things with the Facebook Live, you know, it's kind of, you know, it's unfortunate that didn't happen, but I think we both feel that like it does need to, you know, people need to hear what you've said, basically, and it doesn't, you know, we can't just keep it contained to the people that were in this room when you said it. It needs to be out there.
Yeah.
Very,
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much.
Well, thanks so much.
no problem. Thanks very much for having
Nice
us.
to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Bye.
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 Bye.